They mocked me, laughed at the machine I built in my garage, called it dangerous, ugly, unauthorized. Said I was breaking HOA rules, while our streets froze into death traps. I warned them. I begged them to prepare for the storm. They fined me instead. Then the blizzard hit. The roads vanished. A child began seizing. And the ambulance couldn't reach us. So I broke their rules. I rolled my machine back into the snow, lit fire beneath their frozen authority, and melted a path straight through their lies. But when the cameras showed up, Karen screamed, because the whole world saw the truth. The HOA didn't save this neighborhood. I did, and I wasn't finished yet. It began with the kind of silence that only heavy snow can bring, a hush so complete, it feels like the world has paused to listen. My breath clouded the frosted glass of the workshop window as I tightened the final bolt on the steel tank. Months of work had gone into the skinned knuckles midnight welding sessions and enough bitter gas station coffee to etch my stomach lining. Now gleaming under the bare bulb in my garage stood the machine I had poured everything into, a portable snow melter. Not a plow, not a blower, something better. Heated brine circulated through radiant coils, melting ice on contact without gouging asphalt or cracking concrete. Propane-powered, mounted on heavy-duty wheels, it could clear a 15-foot swath in under a minute. I built it because Birch Hollow Lane never got plowed in time, and the last time it didn't, my wife paid the price. 3 years ago, a surprise January blizzard. Roads untreated. An ambulance stuck 2 blocks away, lights spinning uselessly against a wall of ice. By the time the paramedics reached our door on foot, Allison was gone. She was 42. Her laugh used to fill every room she entered. After that night, the house felt too large and far too quiet. I told myself the machine was practical, a way to keep the street passable. But deep down, I knew it was also penance, an attempt to fix something that could never be fixed. The first real test came on a Tuesday, just after Christmas. I rolled it out at 5:42 a.m., the sky still black and the air sharp enough to cut lungs. 8 fresh inches had fallen overnight. The neighborhood lay buried under a seamless, white quilt. I primed the pump, turned the propane valve, and pressed the igniter. The burner caught with a low, hungry growl. A plume of steam billowed up as the first spray of hot brine hit the ice, and the snow retreated in sizzling waves, revealing dark asphalt like a wound closing in reverse. I started with my own driveway, then the sidewalk. Momentum carried me farther. By the time the sun edged over the ridge, pale and reluctant, I had carved a wide, steaming channel straight down the center of the block. The air carried the sharp tang of salt and heat. A few curtains twitched. Someone gave me a cautious wave. Kids waiting for the school bus stared open-mouthed, their breath hanging in excited clouds. For the first time since Allison's funeral, I felt something close to purpose. Then Karen Delaney appeared. She strode out of her house in a crimson wool coat, the exact shade of her lipstick and her temper. Boots crunching through untouched snow clipboard, in one gloved hand, phone in the other, she planted herself 10 feet away and declared loud enough for the entire cul-de-sac to hear, "You cannot operate industrial-grade machinery on HOA property." I didn't look up right away. I adjusted the pressure valve, wiped my hands on a rag, and said, "It's not industrial, it's homemade, and it's on my driveway." Her laugh was sharp, humorless. That makes it worse. Unregulated, unapproved equipment constructed by an unlicensed resident. There is a process, Jonathan. Forms, standards. I finally met her eyes. Is there a form for keeping the road open so ambulances can get through? She brandished her phone like a weapon. I've already filed the complaint. Article 6, Section 3, mechanical alterations and unauthorized installations. You'll receive formal notice within 48 hours. She didn't spare the machine a real glance, just glared at the rising steam, as if it personally offended her, then turned on her heel and marched back to her house. From the porch, her husband Bill filmed the entire exchange on his phone. That was their routine, Karen commanded from the front lines. Bill collected evidence from the shadows. The notice arrived the next morning, taped to my front door in a bright orange envelope. A $150 fine for operating an unapproved snow management device with a daily escalation of $50. By week's end, I would owe nearly $500 for making the street safer than it had been in years. I stood in the garage holding the paper Allison's photo, smiling down from the shelf above the workbench. Liam, my 12-year-old, patted in wearing mismatched socks and asked if we were in trouble. I told him no. But inside something shifted. I wasn't going to dismantle the machine. I was going to use it. I wasn't going to let a piece of paper stop me. Every morning after that first notice, I rose before the sun pulled on my boots and wheeled the melter out into the frozen dark. The burner ignited with a fierce, defiant burst, sending waves of heat rolling down the street. I widened the channel I'd started pushing past my property line, past the elderly couple, at number 14, past the young family, with toddlers who waved from their windows. Each day, the cleared path grew a little longer, a little safer, the asphalt gleaming wet and black against the endless white. And each day, Karen's retaliation grew sharper. New fines appeared on my door like clockwork. First $200, then $300, then $400. Little yellow stickers with official HOA letterhead, accusing me of everything from visual blight to unauthorized alteration of community roadways. One afternoon, I found a passive-aggressive note tucked under my wiper. Please consider the aesthetic impact of your equipment on our shared curb appeal. Another morning, someone had piled a waist-high drift of dirty snow directly across my freshly cleared walkway. The tire tracks leading away from it matched the wide stance of Karen's white Range Rover perfectly. I cleared it anyway. Liam watched all of this from the living room window, his small face pressed to the glass. One evening he asked, "Why does Mrs. Delaney hate the machine, Dad? It's helping everybody." I didn't have a good answer. I just ruffled his hair and told him some people are more afraid of change than they are of being stuck. Inside, though, the anger was building slow, steady, like packed snow turning to ice. I kept thinking about the ambulance that never made it to Allison. About the dispatcher's calm voice on the phone that night. "We're trying, sir. The trucks can't get traction." About how rules and protocols had stood between my wife and the help she needed. So I fought back the only way I knew how. I drafted a formal request to the HOA board, attached photos of the cleared street, included weather forecasts predicting more heavy snow, copied the local fire chief, an old Army buddy, who still owed me for pulling him out of a bad spot during winter training years ago. I even offered to demonstrate the melter at the clubhouse, let any resident inspect it, sign whatever liability waiver they wanted. The reply came 3 days later. A single-page letter signed on behalf of the board. No individual names, no accountability. Your request to deploy unapproved snow removal equipment within HOA jurisdiction is denied. Continued use will result in escalated daily fines and possible civil enforcement. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and pinned it to the corkboard in the garage, right beside Allison's photo, and the yellowed newspaper clipping from the blizzard that took her. The headline still stung: "Local woman dies waiting for ambulance delayed by snow." That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Liam had gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling beams and the low hum of the refrigerator. I stared at the growing stack of violation notices until the words blurred. Then I made a decision. The machine stayed. The next week brought colder air and shorter days. I kept to my routine, 5:00 a.m. Alarm coffee strong enough to strip paint melter rolling out into the dark. Neighbors began leaving small gestures of thanks, fresh-baked muffins on the porch, a thermos of cocoa, a handwritten note from Mrs. Alvarez that simply read, "Thank you for keeping us safe." Karen noticed. One particularly bitter morning, as steam rose in thick columns from the road, she marched out again this time, with 2 other board members trailing behind her like bodyguards. She carried a measuring tape and a fresh clipboard. "Jonathan," she called, voice slicing through the hiss of brine on ice. "This has gone far enough. You are now altering community property without authorization. We're prepared to involve the county sheriff if necessary." I killed the burner and let the sudden silence settle between us. "Go ahead," I said. "Call them. Ask how long it would take their plow to reach us in a real emergency." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't about emergencies. It's about rules. If everyone decided to ignore the covenants whenever it was convenient, we'd have anarchy." I stepped closer, close enough to see the faint frost on her eyelashes. 3 years ago, we didn't have anarchy, Karen. We had rules, and my wife died because of them. For the first time, something flickered across her face, uncertainty, maybe even a trace of guilt. But it vanished as quickly as it came. She straightened her shoulders, turned away, and snapped a few photos of the steaming pavement. That evening, the official hearing notice arrived. A special session of the Birch Hollow Homeowners Association to be held in the clubhouse on the hill. Agenda item number 1. Unauthorized operation of mechanical snow removal device by resident Jonathan Maddox. They wanted a public trial. I was ready to give them one. The clubhouse sat at the top of the hill like a watchful sentinel, its stone fireplace glowing warmly through tall windows, even on the coldest nights. I arrived 10 minutes early. The way the Army had drilled into me, early is on time is late. Under my arm, I carried a thick folder printed emails. Time-stamped photos, weather reports, still frames from my security cameras showing bare, safe pavement, where ice had ruled just hours before. The room was already half full. Folding chairs formed neat rows facing the long front table. Neighbors bundled in coats and scarves nodded at me as I walked in. Some offered small, encouraging smiles, others stared at the floor. Karen sat dead center at the table, flanked by the rest of the board, tapping a pen against a yellow legal pad with rhythmic impatience. She wore a charcoal blazer tonight, severe and professional, as if she were about to cross-examine a witness instead of bully a grieving widower. At exactly 6 o'clock, she rose, smoothed her skirt, and declared in her crisp, practiced voice, "This special hearing of the Birch Hollow Homeowners Association is now in session. We are here to address repeated and ongoing violations of community standards involving the unauthorized operation of mechanical equipment." She never once said my name. She didn't need to. Every head swiveled toward me anyway. Karen launched into her presentation like a prosecutor who had rehearsed in front of a mirror for weeks. She spoke of liability risks, of potential lawsuits from residents injured by unpredictable steam plumes. She warned of catastrophic equipment failure caused by a device assembled without professional oversight or certification. She held up a grainy, zoomed-in photo of my melter printed on glossy paper as though it were evidence from a crime scene. "This machine," she said, brandishing the photo like a smoking gun, "represents a clear and present danger not only to the operator, but to every person who shares our roads and sidewalks." I raised my hand politely. She ignored it. Next came the aesthetics argument, how the industrial appearance of propane tanks and steel framing eroded property values. How clouds of steam drifting across the street could startle motorists or create hazardous visibility conditions. I nearly laughed out loud at that one. Hazardous visibility, the only thing obscuring anyone's view around here, was 2 feet of unplowed snow. Finally, Steve, the quiet board member who usually just took notes, cleared his throat. "Jonathan, you may respond now." I stood feeling the room's warmth press against my skin. Or maybe it was just the anger rising in my chest. I placed my folder on the small podium Karen had just vacated and opened it slowly. I didn't build that machine because I enjoy breaking rules. I began keeping my voice steady. I built it because our street sits at the bottom of a hill in a microclimate that freezes faster than any other part of the neighborhood. I built it because 3 years ago, an ambulance couldn't reach my house in time to save my wife. A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. Karen's jaw tightened. "I sent the board a detailed proposal last October," I continued. "Offered a full demonstration, offered third-party inspection. I was ignored." Karen interrupted sharply. "Because you failed to follow proper submission protocol." "There is no protocol for this," I replied, meeting her glare. "There's no emergency contingency plan, no winter response strategy. Just fines for anyone who tries to fill the gap you refuse to acknowledge." I held up a printout of the upcoming forecast. "Another major storm is coming next week. You can keep finding me, but you can't find the weather." Mrs. Alvarez gripped her husband's arm in the second row. He'd shattered 2 ribs on that same icy patch the previous winter. A few heads nodded almost imperceptibly. Karen leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "This isn't about snow, Jonathan. This is about control. If we make an exception for one resident's homemade contraption, we open the door to chaos. Where does it end? With people staying alive, I hope," I said quietly. Her eyes flashed. "With anarchy." The vote was swift. They didn't even leave the room. 3 hands rose immediately. Steve hesitated, glanced at me, then raised his as well. 4-1. Violation upheld. Immediate cessation ordered. Daily fines to resume at once. Karen allowed herself a thin, triumphant smile. "You have 48 hours to remove and disassemble the device," she announced. Failure to comply will trigger legal action. I gathered my papers calmly, though my pulse hammered in my ears. As I turned to leave, Karen added almost as an afterthought, "And Jonathan. Should anything happen because of that machine in the meantime, the liability falls entirely on you." In that moment, I understood this had never been about bylaws or safety. It was about power, about reminding every person in that room who held it. Outside, the temperature had plunged again. My breath hung in front of me like a ghost as I stood on the clubhouse steps staring down at the dark, snow-laden street below. 48 hours, she'd said. The forecast called for the next storm in 72. I knew which one would arrive first. 2 days later, the storm arrived right on schedule, soft at first, fat flakes drifting lazily past the streetlights, then thickening into a relentless curtain that swallowed the world whole. I watched from the living room window as Birch Hollow Lane disappeared inch by inch under fresh, wet snow. The channel I had fought so hard to keep open was gone by noon, buried beneath a smooth, deceptive blanket that hid the ice forming underneath. I kept the melter tucked safely in the garage, drained and covered exactly as ordered. No propane hiss, no defiant roar, just silence. I told myself it was temporary. That reason would prevail, that the board would see the forecast and back down. They didn't. At 6 that evening, another envelope appeared, this one sealed with red tape, and slid under my door like a threat. Inside was a bold, underlined cease and desist order dated January 10th, complete with the HOA attorney's letterhead and a warning of immediate civil proceedings if I so much as touched the machine again. I left it on the mat, let the melting snow from my boots soak through the paper. Liam curled up on the couch under Allison's old quilt eyes, fixed on a nature documentary about Arctic survival. He glanced over at me, hazel eyes too serious for a 12-year-old. "Dad, if it gets really bad again, are we going to be okay?" I wanted to promise him we would. Instead, I just pulled him close and said, "We'll figure it out, buddy. We always do." That night, the memories crowded in thicker than the snow outside. I kept replaying the clubhouse meeting, Karen's smug smile. After the vote, the way no one on the board would look me in the eye, the casual threat about liability. I thought about the private plow service. Most of them hired the all-wheel drive SUVs with snow tires warming in heated garages. Rules were easy to enforce when you could pay someone else to break the ice for you. Around midnight, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text from Greg, 2 houses down. "Driveway's a sheet of glass. Dad's stuck inside, bad hip, acting up. Any chance the beast can come out one more time?" I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. My thumbs hovered motionless. Another buzz. Saw Karen's latest post on the HOA app. She's crowing about restoring order. People are pissed. I opened the app for the first time in weeks. There it was, pinned at the top, a photo of the pristine, snow-covered street taken from her upstairs window, caption in bold. "Thanks to vigilant enforcement of our covenants, Birch Hollow is maintaining a clean and orderly winter response. Reminder: unauthorized devices remain prohibited." The comments underneath were a war zone. A handful of loyalists thanked her for protecting property values, but most were furious. "Where's the plow we pay dues for? My kid can't even get to the bus stop safely. You shut down the one guy actually clearing roads." Karen's reply was swift and icy. "HOA policy is not a popularity contest. It is a standard. Standards keep us civilized." I closed the app and stood at the window a long time, watching the snow pile higher against the porch rail. The wind had picked up. It moaned around the eaves like something alive and hungry. Streetlights glowed dimly through the falling veil, turning the neighborhood into a ghost town. By morning, we woke to absolute stillness. No birds, no distant hum of traffic, no city plows, just a thick, unbroken white silence pressing against every window. Over 2 feet had fallen overnight, and beneath it a treacherous layer of ice that turned every slope into a skating rink. I was scraping frost from the inside of the garage window when the first siren reached me, far away, muffled by snow, then closer, urgent. I stepped outside into air so cold it burned my lungs. Down the hill toward the entrance of Birch Hollow, red and white lights pulsed against the whiteout. A fire truck stalled 2 blocks away, tires spinning uselessly on the glazed incline. Firefighters in heavy gear shoveled frantically by hand boots, slipping with every push. My phone lit up again, this time the local scanner app I'd installed years ago. Dispatch voice calm but clipped. Engine 14 responding to 118 Cedar Crest. Elderly female unresponsive. Possible cardiac event. Road access blocked by heavy ice and snow accumulation. Requesting additional units. 118 Cedar Crest. Helen Myers, 81. Lived alone since her husband passed. Sweet woman who still baked banana bread for new neighbors and left it on their porches without a note. The fire truck wasn't moving, and Karen was probably still asleep in her warm bed, dreaming of perfectly compliant sidewalks. I stood there on the porch, breath clouding in frantic bursts, feeling the old helplessness rise like bile. 48 hours had become irrelevant. The storm had won. But I wasn't going to let it win everything. Not again. I couldn't stand there and watch it happen again. Not Helen, not after Allison. I ducked back into the garage, heart slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. The tarp came off the melter in one yank. Dust and frost scattered across the concrete floor. My hands moved on muscle memory, checking the propane level, priming the pump, tightening the hose clamps I'd loosened just days ago to comply with their stupid order. The valve twisted open with a sharp hiss. The igniter clicked once, twice, then the burner caught and thundered into life, a deep orange glow lighting the dim space. Heat rolled out in waves, turning the frozen air inside the garage almost breathable. I wheeled it down the driveway, boots crunching through fresh powder. Steam poured off the coils as soon as the brine hit the ice, carving a sizzling path behind me. Neighbors' curtains fluttered open one by one. Faces appeared pale, wide-eyed, some still in pajamas. No one called out to stop me. No one reached for their phone to report me. They just watched as I marched into the storm with fire trailing at my heels. I didn't bother with sidewalks or driveways this time. I went straight down the center of Birch Hollow Lane toward Cedar Crest toward Helen. The first block was slow going. Packed snow resisted, then surrendered with angry pops and cracks. By the second block, I had the throttle wide open, the machine snarling like it was as furious as I was. A narrow corridor of wet asphalt opened behind me, steam rising so thick it blurred the houses on either side. Halfway there, Greg burst out of his front door, coat half-zipped, shovel in hand. "Jonathan, wait!" he shouted, slipping as he ran toward me. "They're saying she's not breathing steady. The crew's still stuck." I know I called back, "Help me widen it." He didn't hesitate. He fell in behind me, scraping slush to the edges. A teenage boy, Roslin's son Malik, joined us next, then his mother, then two more neighbors I barely knew by name. We moved like a small, desperate army, the melter leading the charge. The fire truck's lights grew brighter through the haze. I could see the crew now, 4 firefighters in full gear faces, red with cold and frustration, digging futilely at the ice trapping their rear wheels. I pushed the machine harder. Brine sprayed in a wide arc, eating through the final barrier. The driver spotted us, eyes widening behind his visor. He gave a sharp wave, "Keep coming." 10 more yards. 5. The path met the truck's bumper with a hiss of steam. The driver threw it into gear. Tires bit into the thawed strip I'd carved, spun once, then gripped. Slowly, ponderously, the massive engine inched forward, following the steaming trail like a lifeline. I stepped aside, chest heaving, and watched them roll past, straight toward Helen's small blue house at the end of Cedar Crest. They reached her door at 1:07 p.m. Paramedics rushed inside with a stretcher. Minutes later, they emerged carrying Helen oxygen mask over her face, an IV line already running. She was unconscious but alive, chest rising and falling in shallow, steady breaths. One of the firefighters paused beside me as they loaded her. He pulled off a glove and offered his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. His voice was rough, tired. "We wouldn't have made it without that path." I shook his hand, too numb to answer. The ambulance followed the same melted channel out, lights flashing, but siren off Helen stable enough for quiet transport. Neighbors stood on their porches in silent clusters watching the vehicles disappear down the hill. For a long moment, the street was still again, broken only by the low idle of the melter and the soft drip of melting snow from rooftops. Then someone started clapping. Slowly at first, one pair of hands, then another, then a wave of applause that rolled down the block. Not loud, not triumphant, just grateful. I killed the burner. The sudden quiet felt deafening. By late afternoon, Karen struck back. A new post appeared on the HOA app, time-stamped 4:12 p.m. A shaky video taken from her upstairs window zoomed in on me operating the melter. The caption was pure venom. Unauthorized and dangerous operation of prohibited equipment During community emergency conditions. Defiance of multiple cease and desist orders. Residents placed at unnecessary risk. Enforcement action required immediately. Hashtags emergency violation. Reckless behavior. HOA must act. No mention of Helen. No mention of the fire truck finally reaching her. Just outrage weaponized into policy. But this time I was ready. I opened the app, attached the full live stream from my front door camera. Clear footage of the stalled fire truck of neighbors working together of paramedics wheeling Helen to safety over the path I'd opened, and hit reply. I didn't write a single word. The video spoke louder than any argument I could have made. Within minutes, the thread exploded. He literally saved her life. Where were you, Karen? This is the risk you're worried about. Shame on the board. Veteran risking fines to help an elderly neighbor, HOA calls it reckless. Karen went radio silent. But the board didn't. At 6:43 p.m., an email arrived from the HOA attorney, formal cold, and threatening an emergency hearing within 24 hours. Legal escalation. Possible injunction. Maybe even police involvement. They wanted to make an example of me. I looked at the melter sitting in the garage, its frame still radiating leftover heat, one wheel slightly bent from the strain. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was furious. And I knew the next storm was already gathering on the horizon. The next hearing was scheduled for 5 o'clock the following afternoon, barely 24 hours after I'd thawed a lifeline through the ice for Helen Myers. Word of the county's interest had already started to spread, but the HOA board wasn't backing down. If anything, they were digging in deeper. I spent the morning in the garage nursing the melter back to health. One of the front wheels had warped under the strain. I hammered it straight on the anvil I kept from my army days, sparks flying like tiny orange warnings. The brine tank was nearly empty, so I mixed a fresh batch coarse rock salt dissolved in hot water until it steamed like a witch's cauldron. My knuckles split again, but the sting felt honest. Useful. Liam wandered in around noon carrying 2 mugs of cocoa. He handed me one without a word, then perched on an overturned bucket and watched me work. "You're going to the meeting tonight, aren't you?" he asked. "Yeah. Think they'll finally listen." I wiped my hands on a rag and looked at him. Really looked. He'd grown taller since the fall, his face sharpening into angles that reminded me too much of Allison. "I think they're going to have to," I said. "Too many people saw what happened yesterday." He nodded slowly, then surprised me. "Can I come?" I started to say no instinct protection, but something in his eyes stopped me. Steady. Determined. The same look Allison used to get when she decided a thing was worth fighting for. "Okay," I told him. "But you sit quiet unless I ask you to speak." He grinned, the first real smile I'd seen from him in weeks. By 4:30, the clubhouse parking lot was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Cars lined both sides of the hill, headlights cutting through the gray dusk. People stomped snow off their boots on the welcome mat, murmuring in low, urgent clusters. The energy was different this time. Restless, almost electric. Karen was already at the front table when we walked in, flanked by the same board members and the same nervous lawyer with the cheap suit. Her face was composed, but I caught the strain around her eyes, the way her fingers worried the edge of her legal pad. More chairs had been added, yet people still stood along the walls. I spotted Greg near the front, arms crossed. Mrs. Alvarez beside him clutching her husband's hand. Roslyn and her son Malik in the back row. Even Helen Myers' niece had driven in from out of town, her eyes red from crying or cold, I couldn't tell which. The gavel came down at 5 sharp. Karen didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We are convening this emergency session," she began, voice clipped, "to address Mr. Maddox's willful and repeated defiance of multiple cease and desist orders. Yesterday's unauthorized operation not only violated HOA covenants, but potentially exposed the association to significant liability." A low rumble of disagreement rolled through the room. She pressed on. "We have a duty to uphold standards that protect every resident equally." The lawyer slid a thick packet across the table, more citations, more threats of injunctions, and liens. He started reading them aloud in a monotone that made half the room fidget. I waited my turn. When Steve finally nodded at me, I stood without the folder this time. I didn't need it anymore. "I'm not here to argue about bylaws tonight," I said, loud enough for the back row to hear. "I'm here because yesterday an 81-year-old woman almost died while emergency vehicles sat stuck 2 blocks away. I opened a path. They reached her. She's alive." I turned to face the crowd directly. "Some of you helped me shovel. Some of you watched from your windows. All of you know what you saw. Heads nodded. Someone in the middle row whispered amen. Karen tried to interrupt. Sentiment is not policy. But Mrs. Alvarez stood up before she could finish. He saved my son's life last month, she said, voice trembling but clear. Jonathan cleared the road when my boy had a seizure in the car. The ambulance never would have made it through the ice otherwise. A murmur of recognition rippled outward. Then Greg stood. He got my father out when his oxygen tank was running low. Roslyn next. He cleared a path so my cousin paramedic with county fire could reach 3 houses on Pine Ridge that had lost heat. One by one, people rose. Stories spilled out small emergencies, near misses moments when the melter had been the difference between fear and safety. The room filled with voices until Karen's gavel banged uselessly against the table. The lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent in her ear. Her face flushed dark red. Finally, the back doors opened and 3 county officials walked in, badges, visible boots, dripping melted snow onto the oak floor. The room quieted instantly. The lead investigator, a woman named Wren, addressed the board directly. We're opening a formal review of Birch Hollow HOA's emergency management practices, she said. Multiple resident complaints combined with dispatch logs and video evidence suggest obstruction of lawful emergency aid. You'll be receiving subpoenas for records within the week. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. No one on the board spoke. The meeting ended without a vote, without new fines, without another smug smile from the front table. People filed out slowly, talking in hushed, excited tones. A few stopped to shake my hand or clap me on the shoulder. Liam walked beside me, eyes wide, taking it all in. Outside, the sky had cleared just enough to show a scattering of stars. The air was brutally cold, but it felt cleaner somehow. As we reached the bottom of the hill, my phone buzzed with a weather alert. Another major system moving in overnight. Heavy snow, high winds, possible multi-day event. I looked at Liam. He looked at me. We both knew what was coming. And this time, we weren't facing it alone. The new storm didn't creep in. It slammed down overnight like a verdict from the sky, winds howling through the eaves, snow driving sideways in sheets so thick the streetlights vanished into white static. By dawn, the power flickered once, twice, then died with a distant pop of transformers exploding under the weight of ice. Half the neighborhood plunged into darkness. Furnaces shut off. Pipes groaned in the walls. The temperature inside the house dropped fast enough that our breath began to fog the windows. I lit the gas fireplace with a match that trembled only slightly in my hand. Liam helped me drag extra blankets from the hall closet, moving quietly, efficiently, the way kids do when they sense the adults are holding fear at bay with their bare hands. We ate cold cereal by candlelight and listened to the wind batter the house like it had a personal grudge. Around 3 a.m. came the scream. It cut through the gale, sharp and desperate, a woman's voice rising over the roar outside. I bolted to the window, yanking the curtain aside. Down on Cedar Crest, a porch light flickered weakly, Lena Whitaker standing barefoot in the snow, thin robe whipping around her legs, arms waving frantically. My daughter, she's seizing, she won't stop, please somebody. I was already pulling on boots and coat before the words fully registered. Liam's eyes were huge in the candle glow. Dad, stay inside, lock the door behind me. I hit the garage running. The melter sat waiting like it had never been, idle frost glittering on its steel frame. I cracked the propane valve, primed the pump, and the burner erupted with a savage blue-orange flare that lit the whole space. Heat blasted out, chasing the deadly chill back a few precious feet. I rolled it down the driveway into a world gone mad. Snow stung my face like needles. Visibility was maybe 10 yards. The machine carved a glowing tunnel through the blizzard, steam mixing with blowing snow into a swirling wall of white and orange. Behind me, doors began to open. Boots crunched. Voices shouted over the wind. Greg appeared first, dragging a wide aluminum shovel face, half covered by a ski mask. "Whitaker girl," he yelled. "Yeah, epilepsy. Meds didn't work." He fell in beside me without another word. Then Roslyn and Malik. Then Mrs. Alvarez, with her husband, limping, but determined. More shapes emerged from the dark neighbors I recognized, only by silhouette forming a ragged chain. We pushed forward together, the melter leading shovels scraping salt bags, ripping open and scattering crystals that hissed where they met the heat. The wind tried to bury every inch we gained. Snow filled the path almost as fast as we cleared it. My arms burned from wrestling the machine through the drifts. Sweat froze on my skin, but we kept moving. Sirens wailed somewhere far away, muffled and hopeless. Dispatch had already marked Birch Hollow a no-go zone. No plow had reached us. No utility truck could climb the hill. We were on our own. 10 brutal minutes later, we reached the Whitaker house. Marcus stood in the doorway, cradling their 6-year-old Ava, small body, rigid limbs, jerking in violent spasms. Lips turning blue in the cold, spilling through the open door. Lena sobbed into my shoulder as I stepped inside. We gave her the rescue dose. It's not stopping. I knelt beside Marcus. Keep her on her side. Keep the airway clear. I'm getting the ambulance through. He looked at me like I was promising the impossible. The road's solid ice. Not for long. Back outside, the crew redoubled. Someone produced a bag of calcium chloride. Another dragged out a snowblower that coughed to life on the third pull. We widened the path to nearly 8 feet, enough for an ambulance to crawl. The sirens grew louder, fighting their way toward the neighborhood entrance. I pushed the melter ahead of their headlights, laying down a ribbon of thawed asphalt that steamed defiantly in the storm. The lead EMT leaned out the window shouting, "Thanks," I couldn't quite hear over the wind. They reached the house at 3:47 a.m. Ava was loaded carefully, still seizing but wrapped in heated blankets of restarted meds, finally pushing through a vein. Lena rode with her. Marcus followed in their SUV tires, gripping the path we'd bled to create. The ambulance turned carefully and headed back down the hill, lights strobing red across the snow faces, watching from every porch. We stood there, in the howling dark, exhausted, half-frozen, coated in ice, and steam strangers who had become something else entirely, in the space of an hour. No one spoke for a long time. Then Greg clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to jolt feeling back into my arm. "We did it," he said, voice hoarse. "We did," I answered. But the night wasn't finished with us yet. By morning, the news vans found us, tires chained, cameras, rolling reporters bundled like Arctic explorers. They caught everything: the makeshift convoy of neighbors still clearing secondary paths, the melter idling like a tired dragon, the fresh tracks of the ambulance that had made it out with a little girl still breathing. One reporter cornered me as I refilled the propane tank. "Sir, you've been threatened with fines and legal action by your own HOA. Yet here you are again. Why?" I wiped frost from my beard and looked straight into the lens. "Because rules that cost lives aren't rules," I said. "They're cowardice, wearing a clipboard." The clip aired on every local station by noon, and by evening the story had gone national. Karen's carefully curated world was cracking wide open, and this time the whole country was watching. The cameras found us before the sun was fully up. By mid-morning, the street in front of my house looked like a war zone turned media circus. News vans lined the curb, satellite dishes pointed skyward, reporters in branded parkas stamping their feet against the cold. Drones buzzed overhead, capturing aerial shots of the steaming paths we'd carved through 3 feet of ice. Neighbors who had been strangers hours ago now stood shoulder to shoulder answering questions, pointing out the route the ambulance had taken, recounting the night in hushed, incredulous voices. I tried to stay in the background, refilling the melter's tank, checking the bent wheel again. But Samantha Leung from Channel 2 spotted me and made a beeline through the snow microphone already extended. "Mr. Maddox's residents say your homemade device is the only reason emergency crews reached a seizing child last night. The HOA has called your actions reckless. What do you say to that?" I straightened, wiped frost from my gloves, and looked past her at the lens. "I say I tried playing by their rules," I answered. "And those rules almost let a little girl die, twice in 1 week." The words came out steadier than I felt. Behind Samantha, the Whitaker house stood quiet now, curtains drawn, but a small pink mitten lay abandoned in the snow by the porch, evidence of the chaos that had unfolded in the dark. She pressed. "The HOA president has accused you of creating chaos. How do you respond?" I gestured toward the cleared artery running down the center of Birch Hollow Lane. "If getting ambulances through is chaos, then yeah, guilty." The crowd around us, neighbors, firefighters off shift, even a couple of utility workers waiting for access, murmured approval. Someone started clapping again. The sound spread. Across the street, the clubhouse doors flew open. Karen emerged in a tailored camel coat and high-heeled boots that sank slightly with every step. 2 remaining board members flanked her like reluctant bodyguards. She marched straight toward the largest cluster of cameras, chin-high, smile practiced and brittle. A reporter thrust a mic forward immediately. "Ms. Delaney, multiple lives appear to have been saved because of Mr. Maddox's actions." Does the HOA plan to drop its enforcement efforts? Karen didn't miss a beat. The association's priority has always been the long-term safety and governance of this community. We are evaluating all legal options to prevent rogue residents from compromising established protocols. The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples of disbelief spread. Samantha Leung turned the mic back toward her. But those protocols left roads impassable for days. Emergency dispatch logs show repeated failed attempts to reach Birch Hollow. Where was the HOA's plan? Karen's smile tightened. We were coordinating with approved contractors. Yet no contractor arrived, Samantha cut in smoothly. And a single resident with a homemade machine succeeded where the official process failed. Repeatedly. Behind Karen, a fire truck finally crested the hill, tires chained, moving slowly but steadily along the path we'd opened hours earlier. EMTs waved as they passed, unloading blankets and hot packs for houses still without power. One of them, the same firefighter who'd shaken my hand after Helen's rescue, paused to nod at me before continuing on. A neighbor shouted from the crowd, voice carrying over the wind. "You gonna find the firefighters too, Karen?" Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Cameras swiveled to catch Karen's reaction. Her cheeks flushed crimson against the cold. She recovered quickly, pivoting toward a different reporter. "This is not about individual heroics," she said sharply. "It's about structure. Without structure, we have liability, property damage, lawsuits." And without that machine, Marcus Whitaker interrupted, stepping forward with Lena beside him. "We'd be planning our daughter's funeral right now." The camera swung toward him. Silence fell. Marcus's voice cracked but held. "Ava is stable because Jonathan got the ambulance here. The rules you love so much almost killed my little girl." Karen opened her mouth. No sound came out. Then the clubhouse doors opened again. 3 county officials strode out this time, led by Deputy Commissioner Harlan Brooks, the same man who'd quietly reviewed my initial complaint weeks earlier. He moved with calm authority badge glinting under the gray sky. He approached the knot of reporters and residents directly. "Folks," he said, voice carrying without shouting after reviewing footage, emergency logs, and resident statements from the past 72 hours, the county has reached a preliminary determination. Karen turned eyes wide. Brooks continued, "Mr. Maddox's actions, and those of cooperating residents, fall clearly under Good Samaritan protections and constitute lawful emergency response. Furthermore, obstruction of such efforts during a declared weather emergency may itself violate county ordinances." He turned to me and extended a gloved hand. "On behalf of the county, thank you, sir." I shook it, feeling the cameras zoom in from every angle, the weight of the moment pressing down like fresh snow. Karen's composure shattered. "You can't seriously be rewarding vigilantism," she snapped, voice climbing. "This man defied direct orders. He undermined everything we've built." Brooks raised an eyebrow. "From what I've seen, ma'am, what you built wasn't working." The crowd erupted, cheers, whistles, a few sharp laughs. Karen spun toward her board members for support. None met her gaze. Rosalind stepped forward from the crowd, voice steady. "We'd like to call for an immediate vote on new board leadership." Murmurs of agreement rose around her. Brooks nodded. "That's entirely within your rights as homeowners." Karen stared at the faces surrounding her neighbors she'd fined, lectured, threatened for years now, looking back without fear. Something broke behind her eyes. She turned abruptly, heels crunching through the thawed path I'd made, and walked alone toward her snowbound Range Rover. No one followed. The cameras kept rolling. And for the first time in years, Birch Hollow Lane felt truly open. Not just the road, but the air between us. The county didn't waste time. 2 days after the confrontation outside the clubhouse, a plain white envelope arrived in my mailbox. No bright orange HOA sticker this time. Just an official seal from the County Oversight Office. Inside was a summons to testify at a formal administrative hearing in the municipal annex 3 towns over. Voluntary for now. But the tone made it clear this was the beginning of the end for someone. I went, of course. The hearing room was sterile, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, long tables arranged in a loose square, 6 county officials, in business casual, taking notes on laptops. No cameras allowed inside, but the weight of everything that had happened outside those doors still pressed in. Investigator Wren sat at the head, the same calm woman who had walked into our clubhouse and turned Karen's world upside down. They started with the basics: timelines, equipment, specs, copies of every fine and cease and desist I'd ever received. I laid it all out on the table, literally. Folders thick with emails, photos, GoPro footage from the melter's handlebars showing stalled emergency vehicles and steaming paths. I walked them through the night. Helen almost died the night Ava seized in her father's arms, the hours neighbors spent shoulder to shoulder in the dark. When they asked why I hadn't simply complied and waited for official help, I answered without hesitation. Because waiting killed my wife 3 years ago. I wasn't going to let it kill anyone else. The room went quiet. One official, a wiry woman named Gupta, leaned forward. And the HOA's response to your initial proposal? Ignored, I said, then fined, then threatened. Witness after witness followed me over the next few days. Greg described watching his elderly father struggle for breath until I cleared a path for oxygen delivery. Mrs. Alvarez spoke through tears about her son's febrile seizure and the ambulance that arrived just in time. Marcus Whitaker recounted holding his convulsing daughter while the storm raged, voice-breaking when he said Jonathan didn't save her life once. He saved it twice. Even the EMT who'd carried Helen Myers down her front steps testified off duty, in uniform badge, polished. He confirmed the dispatch logs, multiple failed attempts to enter Birch Hollow until a civilian-created thermal corridor allowed access. Karen was called on the 4th day. She arrived looking every inch the polished executive cream coat, pearl earrings, hair swept up severely. But the strain showed in the tight line of her mouth, the way her fingers kept smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. She brought the HOA lawyer who objected to nearly every question. She defended herself paragraph by paragraph. Article this, covenant that, potential liability, aesthetic degradation, the sacred necessity of process. When they asked why the HOA had never developed a winter emergency response plan, despite years of heavy snow events, her answer hung in the air like frost. We didn't anticipate needing one. The officials exchanged glances. When they showed her the dispatch recordings, fire trucks idling helplessly, paramedics requesting backup because roads were impassable, her voice grew thinner. We were in consultation with approved vendors. But no vendor arrived, Wren interrupted gently. And a resident's unapproved device succeeded where approved channels failed. Karen had no real answer for that. 2 weeks later, the decision came down delivered by certified mail to every address in Birch Hollow posted on the county website and emailed to every local news outlet that had covered the story. The findings were brutal in their clarity. The Birch Hollow HOA's enforcement actions during a declared weather emergency were deemed excessive, disproportionate, and inconsistent with county public safety ordinances. The board's repeated obstruction of lawful emergency aid efforts created foreseeable risk to resident welfare. Failure to maintain or activate any meaningful winter contingency plan constituted clear negligence. 3 concrete outcomes followed. 1. Karen Delaney was permanently removed from the HOA board and barred from holding any future office. 2. The association was assessed a $25,000 civil penalty funds to be redirected into a new county-administered community safety grant, first project, upgraded emergency access equipment for neighborhoods like ours. 3. My portable snow melter was officially reclassified as an emergency citizen tool, fully registered and licensed with the city. No more fines, no more threats. I read the letter twice in the garage, the paper trembling slightly in my cold hands. Liam stood beside me, reading over my shoulder. "Does this mean you won?" he asked. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the frame already holding Allison's photo. "It means we won," I said. That evening, Roslyn called an emergency community meeting, not in the clubhouse this time, but in the heated pavilion by the pond. Folding chairs in a big circle, no raised table, no gavel. Just neighbors bundled against the lingering cold, passing around thermoses of coffee and hot cider. We voted that night. New board, term limits, mandatory emergency planning committee, transparency rules that required every fine, every decision, every email to be posted publicly within 24 hours. Roslyn was elected president by near unanimous acclaim. Her first motion retired the old unauthorized equipment bylaws entirely. When someone asked what to do about the $25,000 fine money, Greg suggested we use part of it to buy heavy-duty snow mats for the steepest sidewalks and stock emergency kits in every cul-de-sac. The vote was unanimous. As we filed out into the night, the air felt different lighter, even though the temperature hadn't risen. Snow still covered everything, but it no longer felt like a weight pressing us down. Karen's house went on the market a week later. No one was surprised, and no one tried to stop her. Spring arrived late that year, as if winter wanted to squeeze every last reminder from the ground before letting go. Snow lingered in shady corners well into April, melting in slow, reluctant patches that revealed the earth beneath like secrets finally told. But when the thaw finally came, it came all at once, crocuses pushing through the last crust of icebergs returning in noisy waves, the air carrying the clean green scent of new growth. Birch Hollow changed with it. The neighborhood didn't just recover, it woke up. Driveways that had once been silent battlegrounds for passive-aggressive notes now hosted impromptu barbecues and kids chalking hopscotch grids on the pavement. People lingered at mailboxes, trading stories instead of hurried nods. The clubhouse, once a place of clipped agendas and gavels, became a real community hub. Potlucks on Fridays, tool-sharing workshops on weekends, a bulletin board covered in flyers for everything from babysitting swaps to group orders of rock salt for next winter. I upgraded the melter in the garage, turning it into something more than a desperate invention. Stronger frame dual burners for faster coverage, extended nozzles that could reach sidewalks without repositioning. I even added a second smaller unit, portable enough for neighbors to borrow. I named the original one Allison. Not painted on the side or anything dramatic, just a small engraved plate bolted to the frame, where only I would see it every time I started the engine. She would have loved what came next. Under Rosalind's leadership, the reformed HOA rolled out changes that felt almost too good to be real. Heated sidewalk mats installed at every steep corner, coordinated snow removal rotations for elderly residents, a community emergency shed stocked with generators, medical kits, and yes, 2 county-approved portable melters, ready for anyone trained to use them. We held drills now, not just for fires, but for blizzards, who calls whom, where the backup propane is stored, how to clear paths in teams. New families moving in got welcome baskets with flashlights, thermal blankets, and a handwritten note. We look out for each other here. Karen's house sold quickly that summer. A young couple from the city bought it, remote workers with a toddler and a golden retriever. They waved when they unloaded the moving truck, asked about the best pizza place in town, and never once mentioned bylaws. No one brought up the past. The silence around her departure wasn't bitter, it was just complete. Liam and I watched the truck pull away that final day, sitting on the porch with iced tea and the kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. "Think it's really over?" he asked, echoing the question he'd posed months earlier. I thought about it longer this time. "No," I said finally. "It's not over. It's just beginning." He tilted his head, waiting. "We lost something when your mom died," I went on. "Not just her part of us. Trust. Connection. The feeling that people would show up when it mattered. But look around now." He did. Across the street, Greg was helping the new neighbors carry a couch. Down the block, Mrs. Alvarez pushed her grandson on a swing, while Rosalind's son, Malik, mowed her lawn without being asked. Laughter drifted on the warm air. "We got it back," I said. Maybe not the same way, but real. That August, we held the first annual Neighbors' Day on the wide lawn in front of my house. Grills smoking, string lights strung between trees, kids running wild with water guns. Someone brought a bounce house. Another set up a snow cone machine for practice. We built miniature melters out of Lego bricks and judged them in silly categories: most creative flame, fastest melt time on an ice cube. Late that night, after the last guests had gone home, and the fireflies came out, Liam and I cleaned up together. He picked up the old GoPro I'd used to document everything: the stalled ambulances, the steaming paths, the neighbors working in the dark. "Think there are other neighborhoods out there like we were?" he asked, turning the camera over in his hands. I paused, stacking folding chairs. "Probably more than we know." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe they need to hear our story." I smiled. "Maybe they do." So I wrote it down. Not for revenge, not even for vindication, but because somewhere out there another street is buried under snow and silence. Another person is staring at a stack of fines, wondering if doing the right thing is worth the fight. Another child is waiting for help that rules might delay too long. I wrote it for them. For the ones who still believe community is something you build, not something you enforce. For the ones carrying fire inside them, even when everything around them is ice. Winter will come again. It always does. But when it does, Birch Hollow will be ready. Not because we have the perfect machine, not because we finally got the rules right, but because we remembered what matters most. We have each other, and that's the warmest thing of all.